What's up, everybody? Cinephile Mike here, and I have the pleasure of chatting with writer and director Radha Mehta about her powerful and deeply personal new short film, SÜNNA, which translates to Listen, which is screening at the Cleveland International Film Festival and also at the Indian Film Festival of Los Angeles, both happening this month, April. A civil engineer turned filmmaker whose work is rooted in lived experience, music, identity. Radha brings a unique voice to this story of loss, resilience, and rediscovery. Radha, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you. I'm so grateful, Mike. Really appreciate you reaching out and connecting with this.
So, this is such a deeply personal film rooted in your own lived experience. How challenging was it to distill something so layered, identity, loss, music, family, and rediscovery, into a short film format without losing that complexity?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question and thank you for recognizing that. So this kind of story was sitting with me for quite a while just because it's my personal journey has been like 8 years and it's just condensing that within a matter of a week that takes place in this film. It was important for me to hit on certain elements that I just remember so vividly when I was younger that I just hope that there would be a narrative around that aspect of it. But yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of my South Asian stories, I do love touching on family and I do love touching on our culture. And so, yeah, so then it was not easy, I'll say that, but I'm very grateful that I had had the opportunity to workshop the story in a lab once. I'd become a finalist in another competition, and although I didn't win, it then led me to another competition where I did win. And, I've been able to have like the support to help make sure everything tracks. And then you probably know this as well, but like as soon as you shoot the film, once you get into the edit, it just becomes like its own story. So there's a lot of additional things that we worked on during the edit that eventually got us to the film that you saw.
And because it's so tied to sound and the loss of sound,
Mhm.
what were the biggest challenges you had in translating that experience cinematically that felt both truthful to you and immersive for the audience?
Yeah, the main challenge is, I remember when I had to learn sound when I had like, degradation of hearing before I was finally diagnosed with hearing aids. It was a lot through vibrations and it was through like visual aids such as a visual tuner, but it was mainly through feeling. And that is a challenge on how do you convey feeling of vibrations, on a screen, right? You can talk about it, but it's very difficult to actually show that. And I think that that's where I just really leaned into my sound design team because I would tell them that, I was also tapping into certain memories of things that I do remember being able to hear before my hearing continued to degrade, a decay. Um, and that's where like hear a little bit of the echo that kind of happens towards the end when she starts to feel, the strings on the tambor and she like gets closer to it. And so there's like a bit of memory that's being, that's kind of like parlaying into that moment. And I think honestly, sound design was my best friend, right? I think sound in itself is, in my opinion, 51% of a story. And I'm
Yeah.
just really grateful that I was able to have sound department, our sound studio, to be able to help us convey that part of the story.
Yeah, it really is the third character in the story, really,
Yes,
when you break it
100%.
down.
Yeah.
And what I found so moving, and I know I briefly mentioned this off camera. So the as much as I love talking about film and I wish I could do it all day, I work as a theater teacher. So I work as an arts teacher. So I've done it for 23 years now. And so
That's
just any
amazing.
time, we get to use arts for therapy and a means of expression and finding different ways. What I loved about SÜNNA is how powerfully it speaks to the healing nature of art, not just, as expression, but something that's grounding and soothing. When you were shaping this story, how important was it for you to show it not just as as a tool, but a real pathway back to self and discovery?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your service and working in that because I think that we're at a point in our country right now where a lot of that funding is being cut, and that's devastating. That's absolutely devastating because I don't know who I would be without music and some form of art, and being the artist that I am today. And even though I had a whole path of, math and science as an engineer long before I got into film, it's art that truly, truly soothes. And so I hope that there's a change in that and being able to recognize how important what you do is just it's really necessary to be properly funded. So in my case, I was surrounded by musicians within my family. My mom was once a professional singer in India, and then when she was here in America, she just did devotional singing at various temples, Hindu and Jain. And then my dad at one point was a sitar singer, a sitar player, and then my brother is a self-taught piano player who at one point did have a debut at Carnegie Hall. So those were my teachers in the sense of I was just surrounded by music. And even though as my parents are immigrants to America, they had the jobs that they did. My mom was a nurse technician, and then my dad was a civil engineer who had these several jobs long before he was able to found his own company. It was just like music was what truly gave us joy, and it gave like so much happiness in a way, to kind of break away from what some may feel as mundane or just the things that you need to do to like bring food on the table, right? So that became my school, and then I just remember that when I was able to kind of like go between the world of sound and music, I was very into choir, for instance. It just took me into a different world whenever, from what I was learning at home. And it was just like this camaraderie that you had with these other people when you're singing this one piece, with all the different, the sheet music and all the different parts, the alto, soprano, and everything. It was awesome, right? And then when I was in college, I ended up being part of an a cappella group that got to sing the national anthem at I went to Duke, so all the basketball games there. So that
Oh
was
wow.
pretty special. So it
Yeah.
kind of like opened me into these different worlds that I don't know how else I would have gotten to do it without music, right? So yeah, there's that healing aspect. There's this joyful aspect. I honestly think like, the reason we're able to get through our days or get through any of the challenges that we face in life is often through music or some form of entertainment, or storytelling even.
Yeah. Like you, I was a chorus kid and singing, and for years I abandoned it, but it's, maybe one day.
Good
And so,
memories though, right? I'm sure it's good memories.
oh,
Like the
so many.
concerts, I loved
Yep.
them.
Which leads me to ask, and my apologies if I don't entirely pronounce this correctly,
Yeah.
but the song Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Raghavati
pronounced that.
Yeah, Raghupati Raghava Rajaram. Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Um,
mean, yeah, you did a good job.
it plays such a crucial role in this film, and it carries such deep cultural resonance. So, how did you come to choose that song? Like, what did that unlock for you when framing this story?
I'm so glad you asked that. That's the first time I'm being asked with knowing the title of the song. So that's a song that got repurposed during the independence movement. When Mahatma Gandhi had sought that freedom, independence from colonial powers, from the UK. And so it's a song that we've all known, like the generations above me, like my parents or whatever, we've just all known about that song. And the way he repurposed it was a way for the Hindus and Muslims to also join forces. And so the stanza that you hear Lakshmi sing at the end of the film when she's coming in harmony with her mom, it does have an ode to Muslims within India as well. And then the first part that you hear in the temple is to Hindus. I just felt like that was a song that I remember growing up, like whether it was sung in, whether we sang it at temples or just like when people would come home, to our home, it's just an easy song that we could all sing. And so it had that special significance of memory for me, as well as many within my culture. But I wanted to just add that specific touch of just that unity part. I have a special love for both, Hindu and Muslim religions, and I myself am just I'm a spiritual person, but I don't necessarily practice, a specific religion. but I have a lot of love and respect for that because I've been, definitely around Hinduism and Jainism. I have been surrounded by that. And then recently I had the opportunity to make a film on the Muslim culture, and it was the most beautiful experience I had ever had. So it was just my way of kind of bringing that together in the form of a mother who's very Eastern, and then a daughter who's quite Western, hence the tambura and the piano. And then being able to kind of marry that in this specific song that's recognizable across everyone within my culture, and then may not be recognizable to the Western side, Western culture, but that's my voice as a storyteller to at least introduce the idea.
And it's so central in music. And you talked a little bit about the sound, how much you loved working with your sound team, when
Yes.
you were building this. But I also want to ask, with the music being so central and also the absence of it, can you talk about how you collaborated with your composer,
Yeah.
Dhruv Goel, in shaping the soundscape so we could carry that idea of presence and loss when you shaped this film?
Yeah, he's amazing. He's an Indian classically trained musician. And what we did is before the shoot, it was very important that we discussed the exact song that we wanted and what was the actual phrases that we wanted performed. Because even though that's diegetic, we wanted to make sure that it works perfectly in concert with the actual non-diegetic score that he would eventually be building. And so he was the one that kind of helped figure out like what the right chords would be just on the piano, that she would sing at the beginning that eventually, fades out. But then of course, it would be the same pitch that we would hear on the tambura, the drone, and then once again in the piano at the end, and it had to fit within their voice register. So that was a little bit of experimentation, but then also choosing that the specific stanzas that we did and where, right? So at the temple it was Hindu focused, but then at home it had a little bit of a Muslim focus to it. So that was the beginning part before we got into the post part. And so once we got into post, he had access to an ancient instrument. Um, I want to say it's a diggeroo. He messaged me, and I don't know why it slipped my mind, but it's an ancient Indian instrument that only a few people have in the world. So when you see Lakshmi running out of the temple towards a car because she's feeling ashamed, not knowing what's happening to her, there's a very specific sound that he creates from this ancient instrument, and it felt really special to me because it is ancient, but then also like it had like a very tense feeling to it. And and I think between him and I, we were very much into less is more. So that's why there's not an oversaturation of music. We're hoping that the emotions kind of speak for itself, and the actions speak for itself. But in just key moments, it's just like a thematic song that continues to play, and it was all him, and it was really beautiful. For me, it was a really wonderful experience. So,
And while I could talk music all day, I feel I also have to ask, how did Anisha Nagarajan and Aaliya Mehta come into this film, and what did
yeah.
that real life mother-daughter connection bring to the authenticity of this film, these scenes?
Yeah, I got really lucky. I got really lucky that it is a real life mother-daughter, and I think that that was always my hope, but I know that that's a tall order. Because the most important priority was they needed to know how to sing, right? And it needed to sound very pleasant. It wasn't just that they were starting. And so Anisha was the very first time I saw her was years ago. She was the lead of the Andrew Lloyd Webber's
Mhm.
Bombay Dreams in Broadway. And when I saw that, this was long before I got into film or, true storytelling. When I saw that, it was like my first exposure to like a South Asian story in quite a massive scale, like in Broadway. Like that's huge, right? And so I just remember that blowing me away. And so then when we were doing this project, both my casting director, Kirtana, and my producer, Pallavi, had recommended her because they knew her from the Broadway world. And they said that, do you think that you'd want to consider her for the mom? And I was like, oh my God, her voice is amazing. Like, would she even be interested in this? And it turns out she was. And then the next thing that our casting director found out is that her daughter's in musical theater. And although she has not had a lead in like a movie or in anything in film, that this would be an introduction to her. But because they're mother and daughter, we can figure it out. And I was like, absolutely. And she sent me a song. She sang Billie Eilish's "When the Party's Over," and it
Uh-huh.
blew me away. It was so beautiful. Like I still have that video, and it was just like a really rough like iPhone video, but it was so pretty that I was like, oh, this is something that we could definitely work with. So, and that was part of where Drew kind of came in too, is that we were able to send recordings of what we wanted, and then they were able to practice it just a little bit on their piano, so then they weren't coming into it cold.
Right.
And then of course when they were together, it just like it gelled a little bit more naturally.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I got lucky. I got lucky.
So I love to ask this question of all the filmmakers that I'm honored enough to sit down and chat with. It's what I call the educational moment of the interview,
Yeah.
like the paying it forward moment, if you will. For filmmakers who are going to be watching this and are trying to tell these deeply personal stories as you have, what would you say is one best practice that you have learned to rely on as a writer and a filmmaker that you look forward to taking into future projects, and one learning curve that you try to skate by?
Yeah. Great questions. I think one thing that I always rely on and that I'm pretty grateful to be so open to is my fellow collaborators. I think filmmaking is definitely a team sport. And the reason why we get to see, at least the finished films that I've done is largely because my principals that are very that I consider experts in their own specific disciplines were able to elevate it in a way that was beyond what I could think. And just to give an example, like my editor, Joe Murphy, the way I had written that very first opening scene, where she's playing the piano, and then all of a sudden the keys just all you hear is a plunking of the key.
Mhm.
The way I had written it is that if you jump from an audience POV, you would hear the sound quite perfectly, but then from her POV, you wouldn't. But then when we were in the editing room, he says, why not consider this where the audience yet doesn't know? Because then you're giving the plot away too quickly. So why not does it, like why not try a version in which we actually feel like maybe there is something wrong with the piano? And when I watched it again yesterday and I heard from like five other people that watched it, they said the same thing. That's like we had no idea that the piano was actually like the piano was just fine. It was just her, and it was not until the middle when we realized that she also was actually feeling this hearing loss. And I don't know, that was just like a little joy in my mind that I was like, well, that's thanks to my editor. I really appreciate that, and I think that that actually, in my opinion, strengthened the original story that I had. And then I just feel like principles are important. Like when you can have people that you can rely on and that they have their expertise to offer you, then be open and receiving to it because that will serve you much better. So that's one thing I rely on. But the thing that you say, the thing that I have to be cautious of and skate, I um I would say the thing that I have to skate all the time is my own self-confidence. And I second guess myself a lot of times, especially when it comes to the amount of money that's sometimes needed to make a film, but also is the story even worthy?
Mhm.
Like is it going to move people? And I definitely had a lot of that for this story. It was only the competitions and the validation I got from winning those that I was like, okay, this is worth it. But then my reaction to that is, yeah, you are going to have self-doubt. You are going to second guess yourself if the story really matters. But then have a person in your corner, like a friend that you can at least like spitball with, and then see if that person resonates and gives you that sense of confidence that you need, some kind of validation to keep going forward. But the most important sense of validation is if you feel so strongly about it within your own heart that like this needs to be told because my younger version, that my younger self would have loved to have seen this. I think that's should be your North Star. That's definitely now become my North Star. And this journey has kind of like helped validate that too. That I think that so skating just skating your self-doubt and like the lack of worthiness that some people often feel or the imposter syndrome. And the way to just navigate that is just return to your North Star of what would your younger version, want to have seen and keep going based on that.
How beautifully said.
If
I
that
love
makes
that.
sense.
Return to your
Yeah.
North Star. I love that.
Thank
One
you.
more because I know I have to let you go in a moment. As SUNA continues its festival journey through Cleveland and the Festival in LA. What are you hoping that audiences take away from the film after they've spent this beautiful musical 14 minutes in your world?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is thank you for entering into the world of Lakshmi. I hope to continue that specific character in my future stories, such as my feature. And also just have more empathy. Like you don't know what's going on with a family just by looking at them, right? And I think that if you can have just more empathy and less judgment when you meet people, especially people with disabilities, I think that there could be a better exchange of love, that could happen. And when you do lean forward or lead with empathy, you'll be amazed at what you receive as well, So that's my biggest takeaway. Because I will say, there's a lot of pain that we didn't talk about, but it's just like having, being hard of hearing and then yet loving music so much. That's pain. That there's pain there, right? And it's just like you overcome certain things to be able to navigate that so that you can still stay in touch with that love that you have for the thing that you so badly want to hear. And there's a lot of shame that came with that too, like within our culture, people that would say to my parents, like, I must have done something in a past life to deserve this condition. And that's not a fair thing to put on, especially a young person, where they start to feel unworthy for the rest of their lives, right? And they always feel like a need to prove themselves. And I'm very much, that person. And of course, I've had my own journey, with that. But now I feel like I'm in a place where I feel empowered, where I now see my hard of hearing disability as a superpower. Like I can actually turn off the noise and the chaos that's happening around us in the world and be able to just like sit in silence and enjoy that, but also have the ability to hear sound, when I choose to. So yeah, so that's what I mean by empathy, but also just recognizing that, there may be some people feeling shame or pain within themselves. And if you could just be kind.
Well said. Well, Radha, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Congratulations again on SÜNNA. The film is screening at the Cleveland International Film Festival and is also again part of the Indian Film Festival in Los Angeles. So if you are in those two areas seeing this, please check those films out. We'll include the links in the notes for for this interview where you can get your tickets. If you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure you subscribe to the channel for more great filmmaking content, spoiler-free reviews, and again, until next
Thank
time,
you.
this is Cinephile Mike saying take a break and
Yes,
watch
thank you.
something new.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you so
thank you so
much.
much.